Support for this episode of Judaism Unbound comes from the Oshman Family JCC in Palo Alto, California, whose vision is to be the architects of the Jewish future. The Oshman Family JCC is an incubator for new expressions of Jewish identity. It creates innovative Jewish learning, celebrations, and arts programs that inspire personal connections to people and ideas from across the Jewish world. Learn more at www.paloaltojcc.org. This is Judaism Unbound, episode 223, Our Common Destiny. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Dan Liebenson.
And I'm Lex Rothberg.
Today, we're here with leaders of a project called Our Common Destiny. It's a new initiative aimed, as they say, at strengthening global Jewry by linking Jewish communities worldwide to a shared set of values shaped by the input of tens of thousands of diverse Jews across national, religious, and cultural identities. Our Common Destiny was founded by Genesis Philanthropy Group and the Israel Ministry of Diaspora Affairs under the auspices of the Office of the President of Israel. Again, as they put it, Our Common Destiny seeks to unite the global Jewish community around our commonalities, ensuring a thriving future for the Jewish people and humanity. We're really excited to be here today with two leaders of that initiative, Sandy Cardin and Rachel Sabath Beit-Halachmi, and we are going to understand a lot more about this initiative, and we're going to talk through some of its dimensions. One of the pieces that I want to note at the front is that the Our Common Destiny initiative has released recently a crowdsourcing initiative where they're trying to collect your ideas about what should be part of this declaration of what is common to the Jewish people. So you can check out what they have already at ourcommondestiny.org, and there's a link there that we'll have in the show notes to a crowdsourcing poll where you can submit your thoughts on those principles and help enhance them in various ways that we'll talk about. So before we jump in, let me just briefly introduce our guest. Sandy Cardin is the CEO of Our Common Destiny, and previous to that, he spent many years as the president of the Schusterman Family Foundation, one of the largest Jewish foundations in the United States. And our second guest is Rachel Sabath Beit-Halachmi, who is the Director of Content and Education at Our Common Destiny. And previously to that, she was a professor at the Hebrew Union College and also a vice president of the Hartman Institute. She also has a regular Torah study on Jewish lives. So we're really excited to welcome both of you here to Judaism Unbound today.
Thank you, Dan. It's wonderful to be here, and thank you for having us.
Well, Sandy, I thought we could start with you just to talk a little bit about Our Common Destiny. Could you tell us a little bit more than I just did about the story of what it is, how it came about, and what it's aiming to do?
Our Common Destiny is a result of a concern that many people have, including the board of Genesis Philanthropy Group and others in the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs, about what they perceive to be an increasing rift between and among the Jewish people, particularly among Jews who live in Israel and Jews who live elsewhere, but also within the Jewish community itself. And so what they did is they said, well, if we recognize this rift and we want to try to address it, what role can philanthropy play in trying to do that? And after thinking about the matter for a while, they decided that the best way to address it from a philanthropic perspective was to try to craft a declaration, try to draft a document that would actually explain what unites and connects the Jewish people wherever they live, and change the discourse from a discourse of what divides us to a discourse about what unites us. And so Our Common Destiny fundamentally is a project that is designed to do just that. It is designed to change the conversation, to talk about the connections between Jews, to talk about the values and the principles that we all share, and to celebrate those in a very concise statement. And then what we wanted to do, rather than just to project such a document out, we wanted to encourage Jews around the world to participate in the crowdsourcing of that document so that they would join in this celebration of unity and connection. And then we will take this document back to President Reuven Rivlin late in the end of the year, hopefully for his signature. And then the document will become a foundational text of what unites Jews in the 21st century.
And can you give us a little bit of the story of the rounds are. So what's happened up till now? When did this start, and how did the initial draft happen? Was it some guy in a basement, or how did it happen that it goes from the philanthropy group has an idea to this crowdsourcing period where we are now?
Absolutely. So from concept to where we are today is somewhere in the neighborhood, probably about a year, maybe slightly more. Conversations took place, and then a decision to try and proceed in this way. We spent the early part of 2019 taking a look all around the world for leading scholars, academicians, rabbis, so forth, really leading voices in the Jewish world. And we assembled a group of over 30 of those kinds of people from 6 continents. And we invited them to be scholars of our common destiny and invited them to come to Israel in September of 2019 to help us put the final touches on the declaration and to present it as a global effort to President Rivlin. The document itself was crafted by a team of people and did so with very great care and concern to make sure that the language within the document appealed to the broadest possible span of Jewish life. As you can imagine, drafting even a simple sentence in the Jewish community can be complicated if you don't want to offend or otherwise express views that some may not appreciate. So we were very careful in the crafting of this document, and we were able to find a common ground, what we feel is a common ground, that the document talks about unity and connection and a shared destiny. So these 30-some scholars came together in September. We met, we discussed the document, we discussed how we would be crowdsourcing the document. We presented it to President Rivlin. He loved the document and challenged us to take it throughout the world, spending a year making sure that we had as much input and involvement as we possibly could from Jews of all ages, from Jews of all religious perspectives, of Jews from all geographies, and that we would bring it back to him with an understanding that this was a document that was well received in the Jewish community and that he could proceed to sign and then help us push the values that are contained in it out to the Jewish world more broadly.
I would note, by the way, that there's a dearth of podcasters in this group, but what I just for a little bit of an idea there, that I would have thought that the Jewish way would be to create 2 declarations so that people could say, this is our common declaration, that's the declaration I would never sign on to, and then maybe there would be some more.
That's but Rachel, almost happened at several.
It seems like that would be the Jewish way. Rachel, could you share a little bit about the content of the declaration and what are the principles that are in the current version?
The content of the declaration is really based on an idea that the Jewish people, as much as we may represent a very broad spectrum culturally, religiously, ideologically, that there are shared values that continue to unite us and help lift us above any of our disagreements and the ways in which we're different. And so the content is really focused on restating the ways in which our shared history, still very core to who we are as the Jewish people and very much influence who we want to be. From the beginning of Sarah and Abraham to the receiving of the Torah at Sinai, through our journeys in and out of the land of Israel and through exile, that the Jewish people have held on to certain values throughout history. And it also remarks on the shared history of not only having been enslaved and thus being concerned about all those who are oppressed in the world, but it also remarks on the special influence of the Shoah, of the Holocaust, on the experience and the reality of the Jewish people, as well as the creation of our modern day Jewish state and the importance of Jewish sovereignty, enabling us to take more responsibility, not just for the Jewish world, but for humanity. And so those are some of the main ideas that flow through it, all leading to this idea that we have an opportunity now to make a declaration about our common destiny. We can talk a lot about the past, and many of our holidays and events, do that. We remember and celebrate the past. But what about the future? And so after much discussion and a focus on this idea of creating a new agreement, a new declaration, it leads us to really to these 5 main values that really quite miraculously all of these scholars agreed are central to the ways in which we think about ourselves and the ways in which we want to design and really create and crowdsource our common destiny, our future. So these 5 principles are also intentionally open to the ways in which different Jews around the world live these principles. The first one is ensuring the safety and security of Israel and the Jewish people everywhere. The second is accepting a mutual responsibility for each other. The third is strengthening the Jewish identity of all Jews. So these first 3 are really more particularistic, focusing inward. And the second, the last 2, number 4, being a light unto the nations by acting ethically and morally. And number 5, working toward world development and improvement, tikkun olam. Those 2 are really much more outward facing and more universal. So those are the 5 principles, and it's around these 5 principles that we've created this survey. We've created study guides and materials and texts and explanations of each of them, and that's what organizations throughout the world are working with and thinking about and responding to as we speak.
This is a time of year where I spend a lot of time thinking about what is common, what is shared, and what isn't Jewishly. It's a time of year where I do that because, and I'm going to share like a little autobiographical thing. I promise that's not the point of this. But so right now we're in this 7-week period from Passover to Shavuot. We're going to count the days
today.
So that's actually where I'm going. So it is Lag BaOmer today for most Jews around the world. What's funny is it's not Lag BaOmer today for me for a very weird reason, which is that I count the Omer slightly differently from how most American Jews or Israeli Jews count the Omer. I start on a slightly different day. I count with a group called the Karaites. Doesn't really matter all the details of who they are, but like suffice to say, I have a different calendar to some extent right now than the rest of the world. And so it's a funny day because a holiday is being celebrated that I'm actually, that's not quite shared with me. So what all this is to say, like, I think we take as a given sometimes that certain elements of the Jewish story, of the Jewish population worldwide are shared, are common in a way that I'm not always so sure of. And so, and what's funny is Dan and I have had lots of conversations about this on the podcast in the past, and we've sort of reached a place where like Dan often will say that I'm sort of the more peoplehood oriented of the two of us, which I think is true. But I still struggle with the idea, and we've struggled on the podcast with the idea that there really is one shared destiny for the Jewish people in general. So I guess I'd go back to what Dan said jokingly with, what if we created 2 common destinies, one that I would sign on to and one that I'd never set foot in, to quote the famous joke. To somebody like me or like others that might be skeptical that there is a common destiny, how would you respond to us? How would you claim otherwise?
When we talk about our common destiny, what we're trying to do is provoke a conversation and incite a conversation about what that common destiny will be. We don't pretend that we're going to be able to find one path or one vehicle that every Jew is going to follow. That's just unlikely, and we know that. But that doesn't mean that a conversation about what connects us and what unites us is not important. And it also doesn't mean that we don't share things and that we share very, very substantial things. The notion that all of us who are engaged in this process and who are part of this fantastic compilation of folks that we call the Jewish people, that's something we all share. And that may be at the core of what we have. And in many cases, or I shouldn't say in many cases, but in some cases, that may be the extent of what we share, a sense of belonging to the Jewish people. And once you dig deeper into that concept, there isn't so much that we share. I think we see that every day as we understand the different ways that people approach their Judaism, the way they practice their Judaism, the way they think about their Judaism. But that doesn't mean that we don't share the sense of connection to the Jewish people. And so I think in a project like ours, we want to get back to the basic. We want to get back to the understanding that we are a people, that there is something that we share, and to begin a positive conversation about thinking what our common future can be, our common destiny can be, rather than starting with some preconceived notions dependent on our cultural background, our historical background, our religious background, of what we think that destiny has to be. Let's start at the basic and let's build it together. And there are going to be points of divergence. There's no question of that. But as we diverge, let's remember that fundamentally we are united and we're connected, and we have that shared background.
I think when Lex refers to me as the one who's less peoplehood oriented, or whatever, however you put it, though, that you're the one who's more peoplehood oriented, I think that what that's coming from is, and I think it came originally from Daniel Hartman, I first heard it from Yehuda Kurtzer, was this idea that there are Genesis Jews and there are Exodus Jews. And the Genesis Jews are motivated primarily by the idea that we're a family, that we have common ancestry, some version of peoplehood, or at least what you called, Rachel, the covenant of fate. That we are kind of a group and we're in this together. And, maybe Herzl to some extent was like that, we're Jewish because of anti-Semitism, right? And I am much more of what Yehuda Kurtzer talked about or Daniel Hartman talked about as an Exodus Jew, which is that I want to be in a people, but I want to be in a people that is committed to something really important. And what was interesting for me in reading Our Common Destiny principles was that I started to get excited when we got to number 4 and number 5. And I kind of wish that those were number 1 and number 2, because it feels to me like once I'm saying, oh, we have a people who stands for making the world a better place, then the question is, and how do we keep those people safe? How do we keep those people together? I'm invested in that project once I know that we've all agreed on this, what I think, Rachel, you're talking about. And this, I think, comes from Soloveitchik, this idea of a covenant of fate versus a covenant of destiny, or I might translate it as a covenant of purpose. And I'm really, I'm one of those covenant of purpose people. So to me, the peoplehood part of it is sort of secondary. It's only if we have a people that's committed to this purpose, then I'm all in on the people. If we have a peoplehood that is not necessarily committed to this purpose, then my excitement about being part of this people is somewhat contingent on the question of, can I try to get these people to be really committed to that purpose? That's where I'm kind of living, and I'm wondering how that came in the various conversations, and how you've been talking about questions like that since the declaration was first put out.
It's precisely because Jews around the world and at different times have prioritized different values in different ways, that it's important not just to have 1 or 2 values. We could also have 100 values. But are there 5 values that most Jews, not everyone, and not the Karaites and not people who are really kind of on the outside of, an agreed upon sense of who the Jewish people are, by the Jewish people over time? And of course, different people amongst the scholars even have different thoughts about, who is a Jew. But those who identify as Jewish have identified with these values, right, throughout our history. And sometimes we prioritize one over the other, right? Another colleague loves to say, basically the Jewish people can be divided into 2 types of Jews. This is a false dichotomy, but I love it because it's helpful. And it's very stark. And in a way, Daniel Hartman and David Hartman were always playing off this contrast, which is, every Jew is you're either more of a Purim Jew, they're always out to get us and we better protect ourselves, versus Passover Jews, right? The Pesach Jew. The focus is really about liberating others and liberating the world and having our liberation mean something. And I think that's also true amongst, Israelis and different kinds of Zionists today, right? The idea that having a sovereign state also has to mean something. Being Jews the way we are in the world today, with all of our power and all of our resources, it should mean something for other people. And that's our reaching out and having a commitment to Tikkun Olam at the same time. So we're holding all of these values. I also want to say something about the vikuach, the deep principled arguments that occurred since you asked about them. One of them really was about this. Are we a light among the nations? Are we a nation like other nations? And a really clear sense of saying that this is not about a hubris form of, Jews being better, but the uniqueness of an ethical focus that the Jewish people have had about the world, and that we're not just for ourselves. We're also for Shalom Bayit, for the world as well. And so we felt those tensions. And we also at some point had to agree that none of us are going to love 100% of any document. Some of us are going to love 75% of it, but is there a shared 75% where we can all find our place? And I think that's really a question for the Jewish people today.
I think, Dan and Lex and Rachel, I think for your listeners, I think it's important to understand the level of sophistication and knowledge that they bring to this conversation. Because what I would say is this very conversation demonstrates to me the importance of the project. Because three very learned, sophisticated, knowledgeable Jews, it took you about a millisecond to get to what divides us. That's it. That's all it took. And I think the vast majority of the Jewish people, and I humbly will speak for the vast majority of the Jewish people for purpose of our podcast and for our audience, they actually are both. They're Genesis Jews and they're Exodus Jews. They're Purim Jews and they're Passover Jews. In other words, I don't know that they analyze or consider their Judaism in such a sophisticated way. They have a sense that we have a sense that we are part of a collective. We are part of a people. And we want to feel part of something larger than ourselves. And we want to feel that we have an important voice in that people. We want to be safe and secure, and we also want to help others. And so the differentiations that we're drawing are less important, I think, for the majority of Jews than it is for the most knowledgeable and sophisticated among us. And one of the things that we want to do in Our Common Destiny is help bring back a bit of simplicity to what it means to be part of the Jewish people. You raise your hand, you say you belong, you belong. And there are challenges to that, of course, because not every segment or not every part of the Jewish people believes that merely saying that you are Jewish makes you Jewish, right? So we have all these other considerations that we have to deal with all the time. But fundamentally, just for a minute, we hope at Our Common Destiny for longer than that, let's just celebrate our sense of collectivity. Let's just celebrate our sense of belonging to this glorious people with a magnificent history, both for ourselves and knowledge and our contributions to humankind. And then let's think about what can we do as this collective to help make our lives better, to help make the world better, and to help ensure the safety and security of every Jew in the state of Israel.
We had Lila Corwin-Berman on the show a few weeks ago, and she was talking about a variety of different communities, but reflecting on how there are a wide variety of different ways that philanthropic projects solicit input from constituents or from communities or from all sorts of different groups. And she was talking about there's like levels of participation that folks who are not themselves the funders, not themselves on the inside, might have. And so I would love to hear, like, when you talk about soliciting input from Jews all around the world, my question is, what levers are in place to take that input and then sort of channel it into whatever realities will come next? Like, what is the discernment process whereby however many 100 or 1,000 folks will submit their ideas and then the next steps will happen? And I guess my real question is, are there ways that folks separate, like specifically separate from the group of 30 that are sort of playing the most central role? Are there ways in which the folks on the margin, specifically external to this process, are sort of being brought in as the next steps are being taken with Our Common Destiny?
Because of the complicated nature that we've been talking about of Jewish life, we couldn't do what we actually wanted to do. And initially what we wanted to do is crowdsource the text itself of the declaration. But it became clear very, very early on that crowdsourcing the text of the Declaration would be very complicated because we needed to find exactly the right language to make sure that we honored the history and the traditions and the culture of all different aspects of the Jewish community on one hand, and on the other hand, that we didn't create any offense, that we didn't suggest something in this document that significant members, a percentage of the Jewish community would not like, or even, dare I say, find offensive. So what we needed to do is carefully craft the document and to turn to the Jewish people for assistance in completing the document, not into initially drafting it. So there are two parts to the crowdsourcing that we are doing today. The first is a very simple one-question survey in which we ask people to say, of the 5 key principles, core principles and values that Rabbi Rachel mentioned, which resonate the most to you, right? What speaks to you? So we heard Dan say that the last 2, for example, would speak to him more than the first 3.
And sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but just to clarify, because we didn't before, the last 2 are sort of tikkun olam, justice focused, helping, and the first few.
Yes, the last 2 were light unto the nation, sort of showing behaviorally and ethically and morally, to showing kinds of behaviors we want people to pursue, Jews and otherwise, and the other tikkun olam, world development, helping the world in a very tachlis way, right? Through agriculture, through medicine, through science, through technology, all sorts of ways to do that. So each Dan would fill it out in theory that way, and then we and others will, thousands and hopefully hundreds of thousands we will take that information for what it's worth, how this resonated with the self-selected group that voted, and in the declaration itself, we will actually list the principles in accordance with the votes that they receive. Now, it's very clear, we are not suggesting that we are prioritizing the principles. They are kind of like our children. We love them all equally, but they have to be listed somehow in the declaration, and we've decided that we will list them in the order of the votes that they receive through this process, so that the sense of, if it happens that hundreds of thousands of people pick tikkun olam, then that will be the first one. People can draw their own conclusions about whether that means something or not, or they can play it up or they can play it down. We're not making that statement, but it is part of the process. Secondly, for those who are more deeply engaged in this process and really want to dig into the meat of our common destiny in the way that you and Dan would like to do that, we do then take you to the principles themselves, and we ask you to complete this thought. What will the world look like when the Jewish people have fulfilled their responsibility to that commitment? So in other words, what we're saying is not how do we get there, but what will the world look like? And for each of the 5 principles and values, we have given 5 answers. 5 potential answers for what the world will look like. And we're giving people the opportunity to vote on those answers. We're also giving people the opportunity to write in their own answer. And if in the write-in part of the survey, we receive lots of answers that are very, very similar, we will toss out the low answer that we're providing for thought and incorporate that answer so people can vote. The significance of this, Lex, is that actually these answers will be included in the declaration. So we are truly crowdsourcing the completion of the document by asking Jewish people around the world to tell us what they think the world should look like when we meet our obligations to these values and to these principles.
And I just want to note for the record that, 2 things. One, that you can find the way to vote to go to ourcommondestiny.org and then scroll down and there's a vote link and you can press on that and go to the survey. I would also note that I did vote and as will surprise no one, I availed myself of the write-in opportunity. So if you see any contrarian views there, you'll know who they came from.
I can't wait to try to figure out which is yours, Dan.
Yes, I will happily confirm. So before we close, I would love to get a sense from you of what you imagine follows from this. Like, let's say that it all goes well and President Rivlin signs off on it. What happens next? How does having this declaration advance the work of the Jewish people in the next decade or beyond?
First, with regard to the document itself, to the text itself, we do hope that the document becomes a foundational text of contemporary Jewish life. We hope that people see it as an reaffirmation of the core values and principles that connect Jewish people throughout the globe and serves as a reminder of the global nature of our people with Israel at the center. So we see it playing that kind of role. We hope that it's a document that is taught and discussed in forums and webinars and seminars all across the world, perhaps included in the Jewish educational system and Israeli educational system, in Israeli schools, taught in day schools throughout the world. Otherwise serves as a text that confirms the global nature of the Jewish people, that confirms our connection to the state of Israel, and reminds people what it is to be Jewish in the most basic of ways. So we do think that the declaration itself, we hope that will have very significant value as a document in and of itself. Number two, we do hope that people, as they think about what Jewish life going forward is, the future, as Rabbi Rachel mentioned, when thought about what's next, what comes up, that as they think about projects and programs, that they can use the document, use the declaration as a foundation, as a touchstone for why they're doing what they're doing. Many times, in programmatically and philanthropically, people are doing it because people do things because they care about it deeply, but it's hard to tie it to something else. It's hard to relate it more specifically to what's going on around us. Here we hope there's an opportunity that people will say, I'm doing this program because I want to further the third value of the declaration of our common destiny, somehow to give a grounding to a lot of the efforts and a lot of activities that come about. And the third element is that we hope that this conversation and this effort, the voting is very important to us. We hope it helps people understand that being Jewish is an active effort. It's not passive. It's not just being told what was, what is, and what you need to do. It is something in which you are actively engaged, in which you have a voice, and in which your voice matters. And so what we hope is our common destiny is the first of many steps to creating a truly global platform in which every Jew feels the right and feels hopefully the responsibility to participate in helping to shape what Jewish life looks like in the future.
I want to add that, in a sense, this project and this survey is the opposite of a closed canon, right? If in the history of the Jewish people, we've had multiple texts along the way, that oral, that became written, they eventually get closed and they're presented to the Jewish people as a canon. In fact, we have some of these books coming out. I'm part of them, called a canon, a new canon of this, but that's closed, almost by definition, right? When something gets canonized. So this is actually the opposite. It's opening it up and saying to the world, right? The Jewish world, anybody who identifies with any of these principles, come in and make it live, right? So it's actually taking these principles and having them be alive. So I want to just say one more thing, especially since we are on Lag BaOmer and soon Chag Sameach, Shavuot to all of us. We're going to stand at Sinai, right? This mythical place where we all were and will always meet. And the grand statement in the Torah that we quote is about how the Jewish people responded in unanimity and in unison and said, right, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will hear. By the time we get to the Talmud, that already becomes an absurd unanimity. Right? Already, the rabbis in the Talmud say it couldn't possibly have happened like that. I often think about it as that must have been the first and the last time there was any unanimity about any set or any text. And then right, it was only the 10 Commandments only, right? It wasn't even the whole Torah, really. It was the 10 Commandments, and we agreed. We know that the Talmud doesn't even think we could easily agree about something we didn't know and didn't live. And if there is an ikar, if there's a central idea of Judaism that it's, do not do unto another what is hateful unto you, that the second part of that is really important. It's not only, and all the rest is commentary, right? We've got shelves and shelves of commentary, but it's actually go and learn, right? And so the supremely Jewish act is to go and learn, and to learn something that's open and developing and alive. I think there's no greater gift than that. And that is really how I see this project.
There's just one thing nagging at me as we think about this, which is that I understand that you want to make every effort to get the word out broadly that people should participate in this poll, and I hope that many will. But it almost feels, by definition, a lot of the people that Sandy was talking about, the people who really might have a more simple notion of what it is to be Jewish, or might be looking for that, and that they aren't going to ever hear about this. That there are a lot of people that are just not plugged into the Jewish institutional world, and it's precisely because they're not interested in that stuff. And that doesn't mean that they're not interested in complex things. We believe they are. That's a whole big purpose of Judaism Unbound, and hopefully we can reach some of them through this podcast. But we know that so many people who we believe would love Judaism Unbound have never heard of Judaism Unbound. And so the question is, how do we truly do justice to the idea that every Jew matters to this process or to every process? And that means that almost by definition, there's going to be a silent majority. So the question can be even something as simple as sampling, right? That will give greater weight to the sample of those who we know are not participating in institutional life, because we know that almost by definition, there are more of them that are not participating in the survey, or something else. But it feels like in order for this to be really a powerful document, we have to somehow have a response to that idea of how are we truly hearing from all of the Jewish people, and not just the ones that we're always hearing from, because they're the more plugged in and the more active, because they're sort of happy with the institutions that we have, and if we're trying to do something that by definition is saying, hey, we're open to change, then it's a sort of an ironic, kind of situation. How are you thinking about that?
Well, first of all, that question, your question, Dan, all your questions actually really troubled me initially. I want to confess that I was unconvinced that we would be able to get to more voices than the ones we always hear from. And there are two things that actually helped and will help as we move forward. One of which is that it's truly democratic, meaning that your voice and my voice, even though we might be, hyper engaged and out there sharing our opinions, you and I only get one vote. Philanthropists who normally weigh in very heavily with dollars, right, or the Israeli government, right, each of those people, right, each individual only gets one, and I might add also really private vote. And so in putting it out there as far as we can, first of all, nothing's perfect. I don't believe that there's any perfect survey and we'll get every single Jew out there. By the way, we couldn't find a scholar from Greenland, although, we did engage the rabbi who's technically responsible for that region. It's not going to be perfect, but we are through social media, and all you need to participate, right? You don't even need to pay $5 or $7 like you did in the WZO vote, right? All you need is some kind of device and a connection to the internet, which we know that Jews in Uganda and all over the world, have, maybe not every day, every second, but they have access to that. So supreme access through social media, right? In the Mishnah, when they wanted to go find out what the people were doing, they say, let's go out and see. They hypothetically say, we want to know what the people are doing. We'll go out and see. So technically speaking, how many people could they have possibly surveyed, right? In that ancient world. We have, thanks to technology and democracy, most Jews in most places in the world do have access to sharing their voice equally. And so this is unprecedented, and the results will be unprecedented. Will they be 100% and perfect? No, but will it give us, right, this live, open way of engaging and actually knowing what people prioritize? I think that will be incredibly helpful. I think it will be cited. I think it will be meaningful. And I hope that it will spur on, more creative ideas and challenge and the offering of new ways of thinking and being that will ensure that we'll have a vibrant future. And that's what I'm so excited about.
So one thought I often have, to flash back to the part of this episode where we talk about Genesis and Exodus Jews, I often feel like if I were really choosing, I'd be a Numbers Jew, the fourth book of the five in the Torah.
I was worried you were going to say you're a Leviticus Jew. As long as you're not a Leviticus Jew, we're good.
Well, I do happen to like Leviticus. We're in that one right now.
I'm starting to become one, by the way. Anyway.
I think there's a lot. I think there's a lot of depth there, actually. But
Numbers, you're a number guy.
But anyway, Numbers. The reason why I connect with Numbers, and this will sound like a joke, but I do mean it seriously, is that Numbers is the book of like fetching and conflict and like the idea of unity at all among the Israelites as they're wandering in the wilderness, Bamidbar, and like that's what Numbers, that's the name of Numbers in Hebrew, is like in the wilderness. It's literal, but it's also like, we're experiencing this massive transformation and conflict. And I resonate with that deeply. And I often flash to what me is one of the anchor texts of that book, which is usually called in some way the rebellion of Korach. So Korach is this renegade who is framed in the text as sort of trying to it's framed by commentators as sort of trying to dethrone the central authorities. I look at it pretty differently, and I've increasingly looked at it more and more differently over the years, which is that this was a person who rallied a very large grassroots movement. It appears that Korach had hundreds at least of followers, and there's other people named that are sort of his partners in rebellion. He gets a big group together that is unified in its stance on, there's too much authority being held by a couple folks, Moses and Aaron, specifically. We should broaden things. And the response isn't to incorporate their feedback into the next part of the declaration, to make the analogy clear. It's the earth swallows them up, and they are framed for the future of Jewish history as sort of being a cautionary tale, a group that went against the norms of the society and was sort of seen as power hungry, trying to replace Moses as opposed to trying to broaden power to those outside of Moses. So how would you assure folks that if they really do see things differently than how these principles are laid out, that they will be seen not as Korach, as like, oh my gosh, the earth should swallow you up, you're not really part of us, but actually, okay, you are the synagogue that maybe I don't set foot in. You are the alternative declaration that I don't set foot in, but it's, authentic. It's a legitimate approach.
I love that question, and I've wrestled with that text a lot in all the commentaries. It's really a deep question about authority and about the consequences for challenging authority. And it's also an important text when we think about machloket, the idea of argument, and it's also an important text when we think about the idea of pluralism. You're really asking how committed to pluralism really is this project in a way, right? So first of all, let me just say what I hope is obvious, which is there's, the Jewish world does not function with the kind of authoritative presence of a Moshe, right? We don't have a pope. And the Jewish world doesn't function with the sense of, most of it doesn't function with the idea that, a big chunk of the Jewish world will be punished if we challenge authority. We've experienced too many times, we know that that's not true, right? So, right, all Jews alike have found themselves with a shared fate, as we know. But to have a shared destiny, it really is about saying to the idea of machloket, of debate, bring it on. The most interesting thing from my perspective, one of the most interesting things that could come from it is actually, the people who normally make the top-down decisions thinks, a rabbinic organization thinks they have a monopoly on what the people think and feel. This will be a very important corrective. It's controlled actually with the idea that the broader the spectrum we can hear from, the more important the project will be.
Thanks so much to both of you for joining us. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you for having us, and please vote and encourage as many people as you can to participate in the survey. It's really, really important, and we look forward to hearing all of the ideas that people have.
Thank you so much for having us, and I look forward to many more conversations, and Chag Sameach.
Yes, Chag Sameach, happy holiday as we record this, Lag BaOmer. Happy holiday to you future dwellers that are listening on the podcast, because as you listen to this, Shavuot, another holiday, is really, really close. It's just, I think, a couple days after we're releasing this. So, Chag Sameach to that one too. We're just time travelers here today. We're going to close out the episode in the same way that we always do, by encouraging you to be in touch with us. But the us today is not just Judaism Unbound or Jewish Live. It's also Our Common Destiny. So we really do hope that you'll go to ourcommondestiny.org and submit your input. Use that write-in function that Dame talked about. And like, if there's things you want to say in addition to what the principles are and prioritizing them, definitely go for it. Ourcommondestiny.org. And the link to that is also on our website in the show notes on judaismunbound.com. So the other ways that you can be in touch with Judaism Unbound and with Jewish Live are all as follows. There's our Facebook pages, Judaism Unbound and Jewish Live. That's one word for Jewish Live, no spaces. There are our websites, judaismunbound.com and jewishlive.org. There's our Twitter feed for Judaism Unbound, just at Judaism Unbound. And there are our email inboxes, dan@judaismunbound.com and lex@judaismunbound.com. The last request we like to make is that we deeply appreciate any amount of financial donation that you can send our way. And you can do that at jewishlive.org/donate or judaismunbound.com/donate. And any amount that you're able to set aside is really deeply appreciated. So thank you all so much for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. And with that, this has been Judaism Unbound Live.